Very, very kind. Thank you.
I mean, I'm right around following, but I'm getting any freedom message person, you know?
I did want to tell you a little bit about myself, and that is that I have been an entrepreneur my entire life. I started a handyman business in Albuquerque in 1974, and actually grew that business to employ over 1,000 people. I sold that business in 1999. Nobody lost their job, and they're doing better than ever. I had never been involved in politics prior to running for governor of New Mexico. Complete outsider. I went and I introduced myself to the Republican Party a couple of weeks before I announced, and what they said was, "We like you, we like what you've got to say, we're going to include you in all the debates and all the discussions, but you just need to know that you will never get elected. That it's not possible to come from completely outside of politics and get elected governor in a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat." Well, I got elected, and I vetoed 750 bills while I was governor of New Mexico. I had thousands of line item vetoes as governor of New Mexico. Only 2 were overturned, so it made a difference when it came to billions of dollars worth of spending. It made a difference when it came to government passing laws that, in my opinion, were just going to add time and money to our lives and weren't going to make us any safer, weren't going to make us any more healthy. It was just going to be a burden. And I stood up to that and I vetoed that legislation. Now you've got to know that the sky was going to fall, that the earth was going to end, there were going to be dying people in the streets, children are going to go hungry. Well, of course, none of that happened. And the ultimate arbiter of how all those vetoes worked out were the citizens of New Mexico, where in a state that was 2-to-1 Democrat, I got reelected by a bigger margin the second time than the first time. About the message, and the message is, look, let's stop the spending, let's end the wars. Let's abide by the Constitution of the United States. There is a growing police state in this country. Let's stop this growing police state in this country. Now, going forward, it's really important to recognize that there are other third-party candidates, okay? It's not just the Libertarian Party. But the Libertarian Party is going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. And there are only going to be 3 candidates on the ballot in all 50 states. And this is really important to recognize. So when you talk about the 3 candidates that are going to be in the general election come the fall, there are some really, really important distinctions here between the 3. The Libertarian candidate for president is going to distinguish him or herself from the other 2 candidates. Right now, that candidate happens to be me, okay? And I recognize that each and every one of you would be doing what I'm doing right now if given the opportunity, but I've been given this opportunity and I'm trying to make the most out of it. So in the general election, I'm going to talk about 3 candidates because only 3 candidates are going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. But I'm going to be the only candidate that wants to stop foreign aid where we have poor people in this country giving foreign aid to rich people in other countries. I'm going to be the only candidate that does not want to bomb Iran. be the only candidate that wants to get out of Afghanistan now. Bring the troops home. Stop our military interventions. I am outraged by politicians that beat their chests against the terrorist threat, and that comes at a cost of tens of thousands of innocent people being killed in foreign countries, and it results in our men and servicewomen coming back in body bags or with their limbs blown off. This has to stop, and it has to stop now. Fair tax, I really think it's the template to zero taxes. I am the only candidate that would sign legislation to abolish the Federal Reserve. It's a rigged game. It's a rigged game. Federal Reserve gives money to the banks for 0%. The Fed loans money, gives money to the banks. The banks buy treasuries, profiting off you and I with no risk whatsoever. This is not what this country is about.
Paul.com. And don't forget the Ron Paul forums, too. But also, of course, LouRockwell.com, what Ron Paul reads every day. And avoid the propaganda by looking at antiwar.com. And incidentally, I wouldn't be altogether unhappy if you paid me a visit at tomwoods.com. But whatever you do, remember the example of Dr. Paul. In a world of cowards, stick to your principles. In a sea of lies, tell the truth. Into the darkness, shine a light. Do those things, be that person. That is what Ron Paul wants from you. Now, the earliest appearance of the word liberty in writing comes down to us from ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia in 3000 BC. So the land between the rivers, Sumer. We find it in that civilization's cuneiform script. So you and I, that means, are engaged in a struggle that has been going on long before we were born and will persist long after we're dead. The struggle between liberty and power. And so be courageous and studious and persistent. Remember that the one person on this earth you have full power to improve is yourself. Learn and teach whenever and wherever you can. Be your own army of one, and then you will be carrying on the Ron Paul legacy. I want to introduce to you a man who has been one of my greatest supporters and benefactors for almost 20 years. This is a guy who, this is not, of course, one of his greatest accomplishments, but it's one of the things that endears him to me the most. Years ago, when my first really big-selling book came out, 2004, I had The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, I had a lot of attacks on me. How dare I say these things? The New York Times attacked me, the Boston Globe attacked me, certain fashionable libertarians attacked me, and the book kept on selling. Which was great. It's just like Ron Paul. You keep it, when the establishment attacks him, people get more curious about it. So it totally backfired. But who stood by me and promoted me and supported me but our next speaker, Lou Rockwell.
Well, great to be here, and I want to thank Deborah Robinette, and I know all the many people who put so much time into putting this program together. It's an honor to be here and to be with you. I want to talk about Ron Paul in the future. One of the most thrilling memories of the 2012 campaign was the sight of all those huge crowds who came out to see Ron. His competition, meanwhile, couldn't fill half a Starbucks. When I worked, as Tom mentioned, as Ron's chief of staff in the late 1970s and early 1980s, we could only have dreamt of such a result. Now, what was it that attracted all those people to Ron Paul? He didn't offer his followers a spot on the federal gravy train. He didn't pass some phony bill. In fact, he didn't do any of the things we associate with politicians. What his supporters love most about him has nothing to do with politics. Ron Paul is the anti-politician. He tells unfashionable truths. He educates rather than flatters the public. And he stands up for principle even when the whole world is arrayed against him. If the government's propaganda can take root as children grow up, these kids will be no threat to the state apparatus. Indeed, they'll fasten the chains to their own ankles. H.L. Mencken once said that the state doesn't just want to make you obey, it wants to make you want to obey. And that's one thing the government schools do so well. A long-forgotten political thinker, Etienne de la Boétie, wondered why people would ever tolerate an oppressive regime. After all, the people who were governed vastly outnumber the small minority of governors. So the people governed could have put a stop to it all if only they had the will to do so, and yet they rarely do. De la Boétie concluded that the only way any regime could survive was if the public consented to it. That consent could range all the way from enthusiastic support to stoic resignation. But if that consent were ever to vanish, a regime's days would be numbered. And that's why education, real education, is such a threat to any regime. If the state loses its grip over your mind, it loses the key to its very survival. The state is beginning to lose that grip. The media and the political class joined forces to make sure we never found out about Ron Paul. When that proved impossible, they smeared it. All this backfired. The more they panicked about Ron, the more drawn to him people were. They wanted to know, what exactly is it that the establishment is so eager to keep us from hearing? Ours is the most radical challenge to the state ever posed. We aren't trying to make the state more efficient, or show it how it can bring in more revenue, or change the pattern of its wealth redistribution. We're not saying that this subsidy is better than that subsidy, or that this kind of tax would make the system run more smoothly than that one. We reject the existing system root and branch. And we don't oppose all the state's wars because they're counterproductive or overextend the state's forces. We oppose them because mass murder based on lies can never be morally acceptable. We don't beg for scraps from the imperial table. We don't seek a seat at that table. We want to knock the table over. The task before you, before all of us here today. Begin with yourself. Learn everything you can about a free society. As you delve into the literature of liberty, share what you're reading and learning. Start a blog, create a YouTube channel, organize a reading group. But whatever you do, learn, spread what you're learning, and never stop. You've heard it said that the pen is mightier than the sword. Think of the sword as the state. Think of the pen as all of you, each in your own way, spreading the ideas of liberty. Remember that insight of Etienne de la Boétie. All government rests on public consent. And as soon as the public withdraws that consent, any regime is doomed. That's why they fear Ron. That's why they fear us. And it's why, despite all the horrors we read about every day, we may dare to look to the future with hope.